The stars had been kind to humanity for 300 years, and in return, humanity had been kind to the stars. When the first human ships crossed beyond the Sol system and found a galaxy already teeming with ancient civilizations, the aliens expected what they always expected from younger species: war, greed, conquest, the desperate hunger of a race trying to carve its place among giants who had ruled the cosmos for millennia. But humanity surprised them. Instead of warships, humans sent teachers, doctors, engineers, and poets, and they asked not for territory but for friendship, and they offered not threats but open hands and warm smiles, and the galaxy did not quite know what to do with that. Over 3 centuries, humans built 17 colonies across the stars, and every single one of them became a place of beauty and learning and laughter. And the greatest of all these worlds was a green and golden planet called Eligium, a world of rolling meadows and silver rivers and skis so blue they made even the oldest alien visitors stop and stare in wonder. At the heart of Eligium stood a place that every human in the galaxy knew by name: the Cradle of Stars, a massive academy built for children, a shining campus of white towers and open gardens where thousands of young humans from across all 17 colonies came to learn and grow and dream together under one sky. The children who lived there ranged from the very young to teenagers on the edge of adulthood, and they came from every corner of human civilization, and their laughter echoed through the hallways every single day like music that never stopped playing. And the people of Eligium called them the heartbeat of humanity. Ambassador Lena Vasquez loved visiting the cradle whenever her schedule allowed it, and on this particular morning she stood at the edge of the central garden, watching a group of 6-year-olds chasing each other through a field of white flowers, while their teachers clapped and cheered them on. Lena was a tall woman with dark eyes and silver-streaked hair, and she had spent her entire adult life talking to aliens, building bridges between species, finding common ground where others saw only difference. And she was very good at it because she believed with her whole heart that kindness was not weakness, but the greatest strength any civilization could possess. Her assistant, a young man named Ravi, walked up beside her and handed her a datapad. "The Zorath delegation is getting impatient," he said quietly. Lena sighed and looked away from the children. The Zorath Dominion was one of the oldest and most powerful empires in the galaxy, a civilization of massive insectoid beings who had ruled their region of space for over 12,000 years, and they viewed younger species the way a boot views an ant, with total indifference at best and active hostility at worst. Their leader, a towering creature called Overmind Calvraxis, had demanded a meeting with humanity's diplomatic corps 3 weeks ago, and his message had been blunt and cold. Humanity was occupying star systems that the Dominion had once claimed thousands of years before humans even existed, and the Zorath wanted 3 of those colony worlds handed over as tribute. Lena had been negotiating with Calvraxis for days now, and every session felt like talking to a wall made of anger and contempt. She took one last look at the children playing in the garden, smiled softly, and turned to walk toward the diplomatic hall. The negotiation room was cold and dim because the Zorath preferred it that way, and Calvraxis sat at the far end of the table like a mountain of dark chitin and glowing amber eyes, his 4 massive arms folded across his chest, his mandibles clicking slowly in a rhythm that Lena had learned meant impatience. "You waste our time, Ambassador," Calvraxis said, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the floor. "We have made our demands clear, and your refusal is not a negotiation. It is an insult." Lena sat down calmly and placed her hands on the table. "Overmind, I understand your position, and I respect the history of the Dominion," she said in a steady voice. "But those worlds are home to millions of human families now, and I cannot simply hand over their lives. So instead, I would like to propose a trade agreement that would benefit both our peoples, along with a cultural exchange program and shared scientific research that could." Calvraxis slammed one of his fists on the table so hard it cracked. "We do not want your friendship," he hissed. "We do not want your culture or your science or your pathetic little smiles, and we do not understand why you keep offering these things as if they have value." He leaned forward, his amber eyes burning. "You are a soft species, ambassador, and soft species do not survive in this galaxy by saying no to the strong." Lena held his gaze without flinching. "And I believe that strength is not measured by how loudly one can threaten, overmind, but by how wisely one can build." Calvraxis stared at her for a long moment, then made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Then you are a fool," he said, and he stood and walked out of the room without another word. That night, in a darkened war chamber aboard the Zorath flagship orbiting high above a distant moon, Calvraxis addressed his war council, a circle of senior military commanders, each one a veteran of campaigns that had crushed dozens of species across thousands of years. "The soft ones do not understand force," Calvraxis said, his voice low and dangerous. "They smile and talk and offer gifts like children who do not know what the universe truly is, and I am tired of their ignorance." He activated a holographic display showing the Eligium system. "They have built their precious nursery here," he said, pointing one massive claw at Eligium IV. "Thousands of their young gathered in one place like eggs in an unguarded nest, and they did not even think to arm the system properly, because they trust the galaxy to be as gentle as they are." His mandibles clicked in what passed for a Zorath smile. "We will teach them what the galaxy really is." 3 days later, on a bright and beautiful morning on Eligium IV, the children of the Cradle of Stars were singing. It was a tradition. Every week, all 42,000 students would gather in the great amphitheater at the center of campus and sing together, their voices rising into the golden sky like a prayer made of pure joy, and the sound could be heard for miles across the meadows, and the people of Eligium IV would stop whatever they were doing and listen and smile. The song was halfway through when the sky changed. At first it looked like new stars appearing in the daytime, bright points of light growing larger and brighter with every second, and some of the children pointed up and laughed because they thought it was a surprise, a light show, a celebration of some kind. The teachers knew better. The lights were plasma bombardment rounds fired from Zorath warships that had jumped into the system without warning, and they were falling toward the surface at speeds no shield could stop. And the teachers had exactly 9 seconds to understand what was happening before the first impacts hit. The Cradle of Stars ceased to exist in a storm of fire that turned the white towers to dust and the green gardens to glass and the silver rivers to steam, and the sound of 42,000 children singing was replaced by a silence so complete and so heavy that it seemed to crush the entire planet beneath its weight. Across the colony, sirens screamed, but it was already over. The bombardment lasted 11 minutes, and when it ended, there was nothing left of the cradle but a crater 3 miles wide, and a cloud of ash that rose into the sky and blotted out the sun. 42,000 children. Gone. On a diplomatic station 2 star systems away, Ambassador Lena Vasquez received the transmission. She stood in her office and listened to the report, the words, the numbers, the confirmation that the Cradle of Stars had been completely destroyed and that there were no survivors, and Ravi watched her face and waited for her to scream or cry or collapse. She did none of those things. Instead, something left her eyes, something warm and bright and hopeful that had lived there for her entire life, and what replaced it was something Ravi had never seen before. Something ancient and cold and absolutely terrifying. For the first time in 30 years of diplomacy, Ambassador Lena Vasquez had nothing to say. And somewhere deep in the collective memory of the human species, something stirred, something old, something patient, something that humanity had spent 300 years trying to keep asleep. It was awake now. The galaxy expected tears. every species in the Galactic Concord, had seen younger civilizations suffer devastating losses before. And the pattern was always the same. First came the grief, then the desperate pleas for help, then the slow collapse into submission, and finally the quiet acceptance of a new place at the bottom of the galactic food chain. That was what soft species did when the strong reminded them of their place, and humanity was the softest species anyone had ever seen. So the conquered braced itself for sobbing ambassadors and begging politicians, and the pathetic sight of a gentle people learning the hard way that the universe did not reward kindness. But the tears never came. Instead, something far more unsettling happened. Humanity went silent. Within 72 hours of the Eligium massacre, every single human embassy in the galaxy closed its doors, and every human diplomat packed their bags and boarded ships headed home, and every human trade vessel turned around mid-route and flew back to human space without a single word of explanation. The human doctors who staffed medical stations on 14 different alien worlds simply left, taking their equipment with them, and leaving behind only empty rooms and confused patients who had never imagined the gentle healers would ever abandon them. The human engineers who maintained critical infrastructure for 6 conquered member species shut down their projects and walked away. And on the Corvan homeworld, an entire water purification network that humans had built and maintained for free went offline within a week because nobody else knew how to run it. The human teachers who had opened schools on alien worlds closed them overnight, and the human artists who had filled alien galleries with beautiful paintings and sculptures took everything down and vanished, and the human musicians who had performed concerts that drew millions of alien spectators canceled every show and disappeared. In the span of 1 week, humanity erased itself from the galaxy as if it had never been there at all. And then the communication channels went dark. Every frequency, every quantum link, every subspace relay that connected human space to the rest of the galaxy fell silent at the exact same moment. And the silence was so sudden and so complete that several conquered species thought their own equipment had malfunctioned. It had not malfunctioned. Humanity had simply stopped talking. The Galactic Concord held an emergency session to discuss what was happening, and the debate was loud and confused and utterly useless because nobody could agree on what the silence meant. The Zorath representative stood before the assembly and declared that humanity had clearly collapsed under the weight of its own grief, and that the soft species had retreated to its little worlds to cry and lick its wounds, and that this proved once and for all that kindness was weakness and gentleness was just another word for cowardice. Several species applauded. Others were not so sure. Among the uncertain was a Thessari diplomat named Vasquez, a tall and slender being with deep violet skin and 4 golden eyes that had seen more centuries pass than most species had existed. And Vasquez had spent decades working alongside humans, studying them, learning their languages and their customs and their history, and he knew something that almost no other alien in the galaxy knew. He knew what humans were capable of when they stopped being gentle. After the Concord session ended, Vasquez sent a private encrypted message to the Zorath Overmind, and the message contained only 3 sentences. I have read the full and unedited history of the human species, and I strongly urge you to do the same before you celebrate, because you have not broken them, and what comes next will be something this galaxy has never seen. Calvraxis deleted the message without reading past the first line. Across the dark gulf of space, behind the wall of silence, humanity was not crying. Humanity was preparing. On Earth, in the ancient city of Geneva, Captain Darius Okonkwo walked through a set of doors he had never known existed. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and steady hands, a decorated naval officer who had spent 20 years commanding patrol ships along the borders of human space, keeping traders safe and escorting colony transports, and occasionally mediating disputes between alien merchant fleets. And in all those years, he had never fired a weapon in anger because there had never been a need. He had been called to Earth by a priority summons that carried a classification level he did not even know existed. And now he stood in an elevator descending deep beneath the old United Nations building, dropping floor after floor into the bedrock of the planet itself. And when the doors finally opened, he stepped into a vast underground chamber that made his breath catch in his throat. They called it the Vault. The room was enormous, a cathedral of steel and stone filled with holographic displays and data terminals and strategic planning stations. And the walls were lined with screens showing fleet positions and weapons inventories and tactical simulations. And the sheer scale of it told Okonkwo that this place had not been built in response to the Eligium massacre. This place had been built centuries ago. A sharp voice cut through the hum of machinery. "Captain Okonkwo, welcome to the part of humanity we hoped we would never need." The voice belonged to General Miriam Stone, a woman in her 70s with iron-gray hair and eyes that looked like they had been cut from glacier ice. And she stood at the center of the room surrounded by dozens of senior military officers, all of whom wore expressions that Okonkwo had never seen on human faces before, not grief, not anger, but something far more dangerous. "Purpose? What is this place?" Okonkwo asked quietly. "This is where we kept the truth," General Stone said, and she gestured to the screens around them. "For 300 years, humanity showed the galaxy our best face, our kindness, our creativity, our desire for peace. And all of that was real, Captain. Every bit of it was genuine, but it was not the whole picture." She tapped a command into the central console, and the holographic displays changed to show something that made Okonkwo's blood run cold. Ship designs, thousands of them. Warships unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Fast and brutal and armed with weapon systems that made conquered standard technology look like children's toys. And behind the ship designs were production records showing that these vessels had been quietly built and hidden in secret shipyards, buried inside asteroids throughout the Sol system for over 200 years. "Every civilian transport in our fleet has hidden weapon hardpoints," Stone continued in a voice as flat and hard as iron. "Every colony has underground bunkers stocked with enough supplies to sustain a siege for decades. And every research station we have ever built has a secondary purpose that we have never revealed to anyone." Okonkwo stared at the displays. "We have been preparing for this," he said, and it was not a question. "Since the day we first made contact with alien life," Stone confirmed. "We hoped this day would never come, and we did everything in our power to make sure it would not. But we are humans, Captain, and we know our own history. And we know that sooner or later, someone always mistakes kindness for an invitation to do harm." She paused and looked at the officers gathered around her. "We did not avoid war because we were incapable of it," she said. "We avoided it because we knew exactly how good we were at it, and that knowledge frightened us more than any alien empire ever could." The room was silent. 42,000 children, Stone said, and for the first time her voice cracked just barely, just for a moment, before it hardened again into something unbreakable. "For 300 years, we showed the galaxy our better angels, and they killed our children, so now we show them the other side." She turned to Okonkwo. "You are being promoted to Fleet Command, Captain, and you will lead the strike force. And I chose you because I have read every report you have ever filed. And in 20 years of service, you have never once used unnecessary force. And what we are about to do will require more power than this galaxy has ever seen directed by a man who understands that power without restraint is just another kind of cruelty." Okonkwo looked at the war plans, at the hidden fleets, at the weapons that humanity had built in secret while smiling at the galaxy with open hands, and he felt something stir inside him. Not rage, not hatred, but a cold and ancient determination that seemed to rise up from somewhere deeper than his own bones. from the collective memory of a species that had fought its way up from the mud and the blood of a harsh world, and had chosen gentleness, not because it was easy, but because it knew the cost of the alternative. "When do we begin?" he asked. General Stone looked at the clock on the wall. 6 months, she said. 6 months of silence, and then the galaxy learns what humanity really is. And across the stars, the silence continued, heavy, patient, and full of something the galaxy could not yet name but would soon learn to fear. The silence broke on a Tuesday. It broke not with a scream or a roar or a declaration of war broadcast across every channel in the galaxy, but with something much quieter and much more terrifying, a whisper in the dark, a flicker in the void, and then the sudden and total collapse of everything the Zorath Dominion depended on to function. They called it Operation Requiem, and it began at midnight Galactic Standard Time, and it began everywhere at once. The first phase was called Blackout. For 12,000 years, the Zorath Dominion had maintained one of the most advanced faster-than-light communication networks in the galaxy, a vast web of quantum relays and subspace transmitters that connected every world in their empire, and allowed the Overmind to command his forces across hundreds of light years in real time. And this network was the nervous system of the entire Dominion, the thread that held the empire together, and the Zorath considered it completely impenetrable. Human cyber warfare units penetrated it in 43 minutes. The attack came from everywhere and nowhere, thousands of AI-assisted infiltration programs that had been silently planted in Zorath systems over the past 6 months by human stealth operatives who had slipped across the border during the silence, and these programs activated simultaneously and ripped through the Zorath network like fire through dry grass, corrupting data nodes and overloading relay stations and scrambling encryption keys, until the entire system collapsed in on itself like a house made of sand. In 1 hour, every Zorath system in the Dominion was cut off from every other Zorath system. No orders could be sent, no reinforcements could be called, no warnings could be transmitted, and the mighty Zorath war machine, an empire that had crushed dozens of civilizations across millennia, was suddenly blind and deaf and alone in the dark. The second phase was called the Harvest. While the Zorath scrambled to understand why their communications had died, human stealth ships, vessels so advanced that they did not even appear on Zorath sensors, began moving through the Dominion like ghosts. These ships did not attack warships or military stations, and they did not fire on any living being, but what they did was in many ways far more devastating. They targeted supply lines. Fuel depots that fed the Zorath warfleet were drained or disabled, and ammunition factories were shut down by precision strikes that destroyed machinery but left workers unharmed, and food shipments bound for military outposts were intercepted and redirected to civilian populations instead. And within 3 weeks, the Zorath military found itself starving in the middle of its own empire. It was brilliant and it was ruthless, and it was done without killing a single soul. And the Zorath High Command could not understand it, because in 12,000 years of warfare, they had never encountered an enemy who attacked the machine instead of the soldiers. The third phase was called Knocking. Admiral Darius Okonkwo, newly promoted and standing on the bridge of the human flagship Requiem, led the main battle fleet out of the silence and into Zorath space, and the galaxy saw them for the first time, and the galaxy held its breath. The fleet was enormous, far larger than anyone had imagined possible, and the ships were unlike anything the Conquered had ever seen, sleek and fast and armored in materials that Conquered scientists could not identify, carrying weapons systems that operated on principles that alien physicists would spend decades trying to understand. The Zorath border fleet, already weakened by weeks of supply shortages, scrambled to form a defensive line in the Cathara system, and they outnumbered the human fleet 3-1. And the Zorath commander in charge was a veteran of over 100 campaigns who had never lost a battle in his life. The battle lasted 40 minutes. The human ships moved with a coordination that seemed almost supernatural, weaving through Zorath formations like water flowing through cracks in stone, and their weapons cut through Zorath armor as if it were made of paper, and their shields absorbed everything the Zorath threw at them without even flickering. And when it was over, the entire Zorath border fleet was either destroyed or disabled, and the human fleet had lost exactly 0 ships. 0. Across the galaxy, in the conquered observation stations that monitored military activity, alien analysts stared at their screens in disbelief and checked their readings 3 times, and then checked them again, because what they were seeing should not have been possible. The humans had been hiding their true technological level for 300 years. Every trade of technology, every shared research project, every scientific collaboration that humanity had ever engaged in with the conquered, all of it had been done with technology that was generations behind what humans actually possessed, and the gap between what the galaxy thought humans could do and what humans could actually do was so vast that it changed the strategic calculations of every military power in the conquered overnight. The Thessari diplomat Vorethkel watched the battle recordings from his office and felt a chill run through all 4 of his hearts, not because of the destruction, but because of what came next. Because what came next was the moment that would define humanity in the eyes of the galaxy forever. Admiral Okonkwo's fleet pushed deep into Zorath space with a speed that left the broken and scattered Dominion forces unable to respond, and within 2 weeks, the human fleet arrived in orbit above a world called Vrethka, and Vrethka was one of the most important worlds in the entire Dominion. A military hatchery where the Zorath soldier caste laid and raised their larvae, the next generation of Zorath warriors. Thousands upon thousands of them, growing in vast nursery chambers beneath the planet's surface. It was the Zorath equivalent of a world full of children. Okonkwo's officers knew what this world was, and they knew what the Zorath had done to Eligium IV, and the unspoken thought hung in the air of the bridge like smoke. An eye for an eye, a nursery for a nursery, justice in its most ancient and brutal form. Commander Priya Nair, Okonkwo's second-in-command, stood beside him and looked at the tactical display showing the planet below. "The garrison is refusing to surrender," she said quietly. "They are dug in around the hatchery complexes and using the larvae chambers as shields because they think we will not risk hitting them." Okonkwo stared at the planet for a long time. "They think we are like them," he said. "Are we not entitled to be?" Nair asked, and there was something raw and hurt in her voice, "after what they did." Okonkwo turned to look at her, and his eyes were heavy with a grief that he had carried every single day since Eligium. But behind that grief was something harder and clearer and more unshakable than anything the Zorath had ever built. "We are entitled to be," he said, "but we will not be, because if we burn their children to avenge ours, then our children died for nothing, and I will not allow that." He opened a communication channel to the planet below. "This is Admiral Darius Okonkwo of the Human Defense Fleet to the Zorath garrison on Vrethka," he said, and his voice was calm and steady and carried the weight of a species that had made its choice. "We are not you, and your children will live today and every day, but your soldiers have 1 hour to lay down their weapons and surrender, and if they do not, we will come down there and take the garrison by force, and we will do it without harming a single larva, and your soldiers will either surrender or they will die. And the choice is theirs." The garrison fought. Human Marines hit the surface in drop pods that punched through the atmosphere like meteors, and what followed was not a battle, but a demonstration of what 300 years of hidden military development looked like in practice. Human soldiers in powered armor that moved faster than Zorath eyes could track, carrying weapons that could disable a Zorath warrior without killing it, supported by drones and tactical AI systems that mapped every corridor and every chamber in real time. The garrison fell in 6 hours. And when it was over, human medics walked through the hatchery complexes and checked on every single larva, and they left behind medical supplies and food and water purification equipment, and they did not destroy a single egg or harm a single young Zorath, and then they left. In the Galactic Concord chamber, Vorathkel stood before the assembled representatives of 200 species, and spoke in a voice that trembled not with fear but with something close to awe. "Do you see now?" he said. "They are not merciful because they are weak, and they are not restrained because they lack the power to be cruel. They are the most powerful military force this galaxy has ever seen, and they are choosing mercy, and that choice is what makes them more dangerous than any empire that has ever existed, because you cannot intimidate a species that has already conquered its own worst instincts." He paused and looked around the chamber at the silent faces of 100 alien civilizations. "They have already won," he said softly, "and most of you do not even understand how. It took humanity 3 months to do what no civilization in galactic history had ever done: dismantle the Zorath Dominion. Not destroy it, not burn it to ash, not scatter its people across the void the way the Zorath had done to so many others across 12,000 years of conquest and cruelty, but dismantle it, piece by piece, system by system, with a precision that was almost surgical and a restraint that the galaxy found more frightening than any act of destruction could ever be. Every Zorath military installation was neutralized. Every war fleet was either destroyed or captured. Every weapons factory was shut down. Every fortress was breached and emptied. And through it all the human forces followed the same rule that Admiral Okonkwo had set on the very first day: no civilians harmed, no children touched, no unnecessary death. The Zorath military fought hard because that was all they knew how to do, and they were brave in the way that ancient warriors are always brave when their world is ending around them. But bravery was not enough. Not against an enemy that could see through their walls and jam their communications and move through their defenses like shadows through smoke. By the end of the 3rd month, the Zorath Dominion had no functioning military left, and Overmind Kelvraxis sat alone in his throne chamber on Vraxis Prime, the ancient capital world of the Dominion, a planet of dark stone and towering spires that had stood for 12,000 years as a monument to Zorath power. And he felt something he had never felt before in his very long life. Fear. Not the fear of death, because Zorath warriors did not fear death, but something worse, the fear of irrelevance, the fear that everything his species had built and believed and fought for across all those millennia had just been proven hollow by a species that the Zorath had dismissed as prey. His war council was gone, captured, killed, or scattered, and his fleets were wreckage, and his empire was in pieces, and the humans had not even broken a sweat doing it, and that was the part that burned the worst. He had one option left. He activated an emergency channel to the Galactic Concord and demanded intervention. "The humans are aggressors," he declared to the full assembly, his voice booming through the great chamber where 200 alien civilizations sat in their designated seats and watched the Zorath Overmind beg for the first time in recorded history. "They have invaded sovereign Zorath territory and destroyed our military capabilities, and this is an act of unjustified aggression against a founding member of this Concord, and I demand that the full weight of the Concord be brought to bear against them." The chamber erupted. Some species agreed. The humans had always made them nervous with their kindness and their competence and their quiet way of making themselves essential to everything, and this sudden display of overwhelming military power confirmed their worst fears, and they shouted for a united front against humanity before it was too late. But others refused. The Thessari refused, because they had watched the humans spare enemy children while avenging their own, and they knew what that meant about the character of the species they were dealing with. The Corvan Trade Republic refused, because human engineers had built their water systems and human doctors had cured a plague that would have killed millions of Corvan citizens, and the Corvan people remembered who had helped them when no one else would. A dozen smaller species refused, species that had been bullied and exploited and ignored by the larger empires for centuries, species whose children had been educated in human schools, and whose sick had been healed in human hospitals, and whose worlds had been made better by human hands. One by one, they stood and said the same thing in different words. We will not fight the people who helped us to protect the empire that never did. The coalition against humanity fractured and collapsed before it could even form, and Calvraxis watched it happen with a growing horror that eclipsed even his fear of the human fleet orbiting his homeworld. And then the doors of the conquered chamber opened, and Ambassador Lena Vasquez walked in. She had not been seen or heard from in 6 months, not since the day the Cradle of Stars was destroyed, not since the day the light left her eyes, and the entire chamber fell silent as she walked to the human delegation's podium with slow and steady steps, her back straight and her face calm and her dark eyes holding something that was not rage and not grief, but something far more powerful than either. She carried a single datapad. She placed it on the podium and looked out at the assembly, 200 species, thousands of diplomats, the collected political power of an entire galaxy. And she said nothing for a long moment, and the silence was so complete that the representatives could hear their own heartbeats. Then she activated the datapad. Sound filled the chamber, the sound of children singing. 42,000 voices raised together in the amphitheater of the Cradle of Stars, a recording made on the last morning, the song they were singing when the sky turned to fire, and the melody was sweet and simple, and full of a joy so pure that it hurt to hear it because everyone in that chamber knew how the song ended. The recording played for 30 seconds, and then it stopped, and what followed was the other recording, the sound of the bombardment, the roar of plasma rounds striking the surface, and then the silence, the terrible, terrible silence of a place where 42,000 children had been alive and singing one moment and gone the next. Lena let the silence hang in the chamber for 10 full seconds. Then she spoke. "We came to this galaxy with open hands," she said, and her voice was steady and clear and carried to every corner of the vast room. "We built schools for your children and hospitals for your sick and bridges between your worlds, and we asked for nothing in return except the chance to be your friends. And we did this for 300 years because we believed that the galaxy could be better than it was, that kindness could be stronger than cruelty, that the future did not have to be written in blood." She paused. "And in return, you killed our children." The chamber was deathly silent. "Not all of you," Lena continued, "but enough of you. Some of you pulled the trigger, and some of you applauded, and some of you simply looked away and said nothing, and all of those choices led to the same place. A crater where a school used to be, and the silence where a song used to live." She looked directly at Calvraxis, who sat frozen in his seat like a statue carved from dark stone. "We did not come to conquer the Dominion," she said. "We came to ensure that no civilization in this galaxy ever looks at humanity and sees prey again. And we came to make a promise, not just to ourselves, but to every species in this room." She activated another display on her datapad, and the holographic projectors in the chamber lit up with the text of a document, a treaty, written in every language spoken by every member of the conquered. "This is the Vasquez Accords," she said, "and these are not terms for the Zorath, these are terms for all of you, a new agreement that will govern how civilizations in this galaxy treat the defenseless." She read the core principles aloud. "Any species that deliberately targets civilian populations, especially children, will face the full and unrestrained military response of humanity. Humanity will serve as the galaxy's protector of last resort for the defenseless, whether they are human or not. Any species that is too weak to defend its own people may request human protection. And that protection will be given freely and without conditions." "We are not asking to rule you," Lena said. "We are not asking to lead you, and we are not asking for your gratitude or your submission, but we are telling you, as clearly as we know how, that the days of the strong preying on the weak in this galaxy are over, because humanity has decided that they are over, and we have the power to make that decision stick. She turned off the datapad and looked at the assembly one final time. "You wanted to know what we are," she said quietly. "Now you know." She stepped down from the podium and walked out of the chamber without waiting for a response, and behind her the silence lasted for a very long time. Meanwhile, in orbit above Vraxis Prime, Admiral Okonkwo opened a channel to the Overmind's throne chamber. "Overmind Calvraxis," he said, "I am transmitting a list of names, 17 military and political leaders of the Zorath Dominion, who were directly responsible for ordering the bombardment of Eligium IV, and your name is at the top of that list." He paused. "You will surrender yourself and everyone on this list to human custody to stand trial for crimes against civilization, and you will be given legal representation and a fair hearing and every right that civilized justice demands, because we are not here for revenge, Overmind, we are here for justice, and there is a difference. And if you cannot see that difference, then you have learned nothing from any of this." There was a long silence on the other end of the channel. And then Calvraxis spoke, and his voice was small and hollow and stripped of every bit of the arrogance and contempt that had defined him for centuries. "I will surrender," he said. And on that day, for the first time in 12,000 years, the Overmind of the Zorath Dominion bent his knee, not to a conqueror, not to a predator, not to a species that had proven itself crueler or more ruthless than the Zorath, but to a species that had proven itself better. 5 years passed, and the galaxy changed. It changed slowly at first, the way a river changes course, not in a single dramatic moment, but through the steady, patient work of water against stone, day after day, until one morning the people living along its banks wake up and realize that the world around them is different from the one they grew up in, and they cannot quite remember when the change began. But everyone knew where it began. It began on a green and golden planet called Eligium IV, in a crater 3 miles wide where a school used to be. The crater was gone now. In its place stood a new academy, larger and grander, and more beautiful than the Cradle of Stars had ever been, and they called it the Cradle Reborn, and it rose from the earth like a promise made in stone and glass and light, a cathedral of learning with white towers that reached toward the sky and open gardens that bloomed with flowers from 17 human worlds and a dozen alien ones too, because the aliens had insisted on helping. The Thessari had sent architects who designed the great library at the center of the campus, a soaring space of violet crystal and silver light that held the collected knowledge of 100 civilizations. And the Corvan had sent engineers who built the water gardens that wound through the grounds like liquid silver, and even species that had never had any particular friendship with humanity sent gifts. Seeds and saplings and works of art and musical instruments, and books written in languages that human children would now have the chance to learn. Around the Cradle Reborn stood a memorial garden, and in that garden there were 42,000 stones. Each stone was small enough to hold in one hand, and each one was carved with a name and a date, and a single line chosen by the family of the child it represented. A favorite joke, a dream for the future, the last thing the child had said to someone they loved, and the stones were arranged in a vast spiral that wound outward from a central point where a single tree grew, a tree that had been planted on the first anniversary of the massacre and had grown tall and strong in the years since, its branches spreading wide enough to cast shade across hundreds of the stones beneath it. People came from across the galaxy to walk through the memorial garden, and they came not just out of curiosity, but out of something deeper, a need to understand, to witness, to stand in the place where the story had begun and feel the weight of what had happened and what had come after. The Vasquez Accords had changed everything. What had started as a treaty born from grief and fury had become the foundation of a new galactic order, Not an empire and not a government, but something the galaxy had never seen before. A promise backed by power, a shield held over the weak by the strong, a simple and unbreakable declaration that the days of preying on the defenseless were finished. Human rapid response fleets now patrolled the borders of vulnerable civilizations, not as conquerors or occupiers, but as guardians, and their presence alone was enough to make even the most aggressive empires think twice before launching the kind of campaigns that had once been considered normal business in the galaxy. Human lawyers worked in the conquered courts, advocating for species that had no voice and no power and no hope of justice without someone willing to stand beside them. And human diplomats sat in every council chamber and every negotiation room, and they carried with them the quiet authority of a species that had proven it would back its words with action. The galaxy had a word for what humanity had become, and different species said it in different ways, but it all meant the same thing: the Guardians. And the remarkable thing, the thing that confused and amazed the older civilizations most of all, was that humanity did not seem to want anything in return. They did not demand tribute or territory or submission, and they did not ask the species they protected to swear loyalty or join alliances or change their cultures or their beliefs. And when the grateful leaders of rescued civilizations asked what they owed, the human response was always the same: be kind to someone who cannot repay you, and we will call it even. Admiral Darius Okonkwo had not expected to become famous, and he did not particularly enjoy it. But the galaxy had decided that he was the face of the new humanity whether he liked it or not. And so, he accepted it with the same steady grace that he brought to everything else in his life. On a cool morning 5 years after the war, he visited a place he had never expected to visit again. The Zorath world of Vrethka, the military hatchery world where he had made the decision that defined him. The world was different now. The Zorath Dominion had been restructured from the ground up, its ancient caste system reformed, its military reduced to a defense force, its government rebuilt around principles that would have been unthinkable a decade ago, and the process had been painful and messy and full of setbacks. But it was happening, slowly and stubbornly, the way all real change happens. Okonkwo walked through a new building on Vrethka, a school, built jointly by human and Zorath engineers, where young Zorath learned alongside children of other species for the first time in the history of their civilization, and the sight of insectoid juveniles sitting next to Thessari children and Corvan youngsters and human kids in a classroom filled with light and color, and the sound of learning was something that would have been impossible to imagine just a few years ago. A young Zorath approached him in the hallway, barely old enough to speak in full sentences, its small amber eyes wide with a curiosity that the old Zorath caste system would have beaten out of it before it could walk. "You are the human admiral," the young Zorath said. "I am," Okonkwo replied. "My teachers told me what happened," the young Zorath said. "They told me about the war and about what our leaders did to your children, and I want to know. Why did you not destroy us when you had the chance? Because you could have, and nobody would have blamed you, and after what we did, many species would say you had the right." Okonkwo knelt down so that he was at eye level with the young Zorath, and he looked into those amber eyes and saw something he recognized. The same confused and searching look that human children got when they were trying to understand a world that did not always make sense. "Because someone has to be the first to stop the cycle," he said quietly. "Someone has to look at a universe full of pain and cruelty and say that it ends here and that the next generation will inherit something better than what we were given, and we decided that someone would be us." The young Zorath considered this for a long moment. "That sounds very difficult," it said. Okonkwo smiled. "It is the hardest thing we have ever done," he said, "and it is the only thing that matters." Across the galaxy, in a quiet study filled with books and soft light, The Thessari diplomat Vorethkel finished writing the final chapter of a book that would become the most widely read text in galactic history. He had spent 3 years working on it, interviewing humans and aliens alike, studying records and battle footage and diplomatic transcripts and personal letters, and the result was a work that would reshape how every civilization in the galaxy understood the strange and wonderful and terrifying species called humanity. The title of the book was The Other Side of Humanity: Why the Galaxy's Gentlest Species is Also Its Most Dangerous. And in the final chapter, Vorethkel wrote the passage that would be quoted in every language on every world for generations to come. I have spent my life among the stars, and I have known 1,000 species, and I have seen empires rise and fall and rise again. And in all that time, I have never encountered anything as confounding or as beautiful or as fearsome as the human race. A species that can build a garden in the morning and burn down a fortress in the afternoon and weep for the enemy's children in the evening. A species that carries within itself the capacity for both boundless cruelty and bottomless compassion, and that has somehow, against all odds and against every lesson the universe has tried to teach it, chosen compassion as its guiding star. Humans do not fight because they love war. They fight because they love something more than war, and heaven help you if you threaten it. On Eligium IV, as the sun set over the cradle reborn and painted the sky in shades of gold and amber and deep violet, Ambassador Lena Vasquez sat on a bench in the memorial garden among the 42,000 stones. She had retired from diplomacy 2 years ago, and she lived on Eligium IV now, and she taught literature and history to the children at the cradle reborn, and every morning she walked through the garden and touched the stones and remembered the names, and every morning it hurt, and every morning she did it anyway because remembering was a duty and a privilege and a promise all at once. The sound of children reached her from the academy, laughter and shouting, and the thump of running feet, and the high clear voices of young people arguing about something that probably did not matter at all, and mattered more than anything in the universe. She closed her eyes and listened. The song had come back. Not the same song, that song was gone forever, burned away in a fire that had changed everything, but a new song, sung by new voices, carried on the wind across a garden built on top of grief and watered with tears and blooming nonetheless with flowers that did not care about the ashes beneath them, because flowers never do. Lena listened to the children laugh, and she felt the warmth of the sun on her face, and she whispered 2 words into the evening air. Never again. And the wind carried her words across the garden and out over the fields and up into the golden sky, where the stars were beginning to appear one by one, the same stars that humanity had reached for 300 years ago with open hands and hopeful hearts, the same stars that had tested them and broken them and forged them into something the galaxy had never seen before and would never forget. The galaxy had wanted to know what humanity was made of. They found out, not in the fire of their warships or the edge of their blades, but in the hand extended to a fallen enemy, in the mercy shown to a hatchery full of children who belonged to the species that had murdered their own, in the quiet, steady refusal to let grief become cruelty or pain become hatred or loss, become an excuse to abandon everything that made them who they were. They found it in the laughter of children who would never be silenced again,